Into 2001, Argentina had one of the most educated populations in Latin America, a strong middle class, a diversified economy, a currency pegged to the United States dollar, a decision designed to project stability and attract foreign investment. By December of that year, the government had frozen every bank account in the country. Ordinary Argentines woke up one morning and discovered that the money they had worked their entire lives to save was inaccessible. Not lost, not stolen, simply locked by the government indefinitely. Within weeks, the peso had collapsed. Unemployment hit 20%. The middle class, the sector of society that had done everything right, saved carefully, followed the rules, was effectively wiped out in the space of 90 days. This was not the first time Argentina had done this. It was not the last. Most people think of a country going broke as a dramatic singular event, a moment of collapse that arrives suddenly and without warning. It is not. It is a sequence, a predictable, documented, historically consistent sequence of events with identifiable warning signs, identifiable turning points, and identifiable victims. Today on Wealth Map, we are mapping exactly what happens when a country runs out of money. The real sequence, the real institutions involved, and the real question that every case study eventually forces you to ask: who actually pays? Here is how it begins. Every single time a government spends more than it collects in tax revenue, it finances the gap by borrowing, issuing bonds that investors around the world purchase in exchange for regular interest payments and the return of their principal at maturity. For a period, this works. Investors are willing to lend because the interest rate compensates them for the risk. The government continues spending. The debt accumulates. Then something shifts. It could be a global recession that reduces tax revenue, a commodity price collapse that destroys export earnings, a political crisis that undermines investor confidence. Often, it is a combination of all three arriving simultaneously. Investors begin to worry about whether they will be repaid. They demand higher interest rates to compensate for the increased risk. Higher interest rates mean the government must spend more of its revenue on debt repayments, leaving less for everything else. The fiscal position deteriorates further. Investors demand even higher rates. Higher rates leading to higher cost, leading to higher risk, is called a debt trap. And once a country enters it, escaping without severe pain becomes almost mathematically impossible. The currency is usually the first thing ordinary people feel. Before any government officially announces a debt crisis, its currency begins to tell the truth. Investors and wealthy citizens who understand what is coming begin moving their money out of the country, converting local currency into dollars or euros and transferring it abroad. The demand for foreign currency rises. The local currency weakens. As the currency weakens, the cost of imports rises. Since most developing economies import significant quantities of food, fuel, and medicine, the price of daily necessities begins climbing immediately. Inflation accelerates. The purchasing power of ordinary wages erodes week by week. By the time the government makes any official announcement, and governments always delay because announcements accelerate the crisis, ordinary citizens have already been experiencing the collapse for months. They simply had no framework to understand what they were experiencing. This is the cruelest feature of sovereign debt crises. The people with the least financial sophistication and the fewest options always absorb the impact earliest and most completely. At some point in the spiral, the government can no longer meet its debt obligations. It calls the IMF. Most people understand the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, as an institution that helps countries in crisis, a financial rescuer, a lender of last resort for sovereign governments. This understanding is partially correct and almost entirely misleading. The IMF does lend to governments in crisis, but the money does not come without conditions. And the conditions, called structural adjustment programs, follow a remarkably consistent template. Regardless of the specific country or crisis, cut government spending, reduce subsidies on food and fuel, privatize state-owned assets, raise interest rates, liberalize trade, devalue the currency. Each of these conditions is defensible in isolation from a pure macroeconomic perspective. Collectively, they transfer the cost of the crisis, a crisis created by government borrowing decisions and international lending decisions, almost entirely onto the population that had the least involvement in either. Public sector wages are cut, food subsidies are removed, state companies that employed thousands are sold to international investors at distressed prices. The social safety net is dismantled precisely when the population needs it most. The international creditors, the banks and funds that lend the money in the first place, are repaid, protected by the IMF program, made whole by conditions imposed on people who never borrowed anything. Argentina has been through this cycle 9 times. Greece went through it after 2010. Sri Lanka went through it in 2022. Each time the sequence is recognizably the same. Each time the cost falls in the same direction. The exit from sovereign default is always the same as well. Debt restructuring, negotiating with creditors to extend repayment timelines, reduce interest rates, or accept a reduction in the principal owed. Fiscal adjustment, bringing government spending into sustainable alignment with revenues. Currency stabilization, rebuilding foreign currency reserves to support the exchange rate. And time, years of slow, painful reconstruction of institutional credibility with international markets. Countries do recover. Argentina has recovered multiple times before defaulting again. Greece stabilized. Iceland, which went through a severe banking crisis in 2008, recovered remarkably quickly by doing something almost no other crisis country has done. It let its banks fail. It did not protect its creditors. It imposed the cost of the crisis on the institutions that created it rather than on the population that suffered it. Within 5 years, Iceland had one of the strongest recoveries of any crisis economy in modern history. The lesson is not comfortable for international financial institutions, which may explain why it receives so little attention in the standard narrative of sovereign debt crises. When a country goes broke, the sequence is always predictable. The warning signs are always visible. The institutions that arrive to manage the crisis always protect the same interest. And the people who pay are almost always the ones who can least afford to. Understanding this does not make you powerless. It makes you precise about what you are looking at when you see the early warning signs, the currency weakening, the interest rates rising, the political language shifting from confidence to reassurance. Reassurance from a government facing a debt crisis is itself a warning sign, because what is being reassured is almost always what is already lost. This is Wealth Map. We map the sequences that most people only understand after they have already lived through them. Subscribe, because the next map takes you inside the empire that profits from every one of these crises, regardless of which country is experiencing them.